from the Ionian node. 7 or 6 modal half steps back from the Ionian would land me in the Dorian. It would be a 1-2 modal range, -10 as a distance, and we would call that a -10 major second. Why? Because going forward would be a 2 node away major second, which would be 12 minus 10. I'd rather call it a 10 node away from the Ionian node, -6 modal half step, because going forward would be a 2 node away from the Ionian node first modal half step. So we're going to get to note-wise a D if we make the C the Ionian. And let's make that yellow. It has been our color there. So let's make that yellow. Ba-boom. And so if I go -5, -10, there's a D right there. I can also go -5, -6, 7, 8, 9, 10. These two are the same note. Here's the D up there. How do I get there? -5, -10, -15, -14, 13, 12. Wait, that's a C. I was going, let me undo that. Undo, -5, -10, -15, -14, 13, 12, 11, 10 going out to here. This one, of course, is the octave. So all of the C's are the octave of this green one. All right, let's see. I was going to do this with more than one, so this took way longer than I expected, of course, which is typically the case. Let's just try to go to the Dorian. And this time, I'm going to try to look at a different collection of notes, but go around the Dorian node. Why is it popping up like this? What is happening? So let's just measure a few. This time, we're going to measure around the Dorian node, but it's going to be the collection of notes around a D Dorian. No, around the C Dorian. So I'm going to make it a C Dorian instead of the D Dorian, which means we're going to have a different collection of 7 notes that we'll measure out on this one. All right, so let's say that we're going to take now our cookie cutter, but this time instead of measuring around the Ionian, I'm going to measure around the Dorian. Now notice if I assign the Dorian as my center point, then most people are going to get a little bit confused because they're going to have to go back and say, well, if they're going to have to say, well, if the C is the Dorian, what's the Ionian? It would be an A sharp. Why? Because most people assign the 12 degrees of rotation to the collection of notes around the Ionian or major scale. But you don't have to, right? I could say, so if I say that I'm going to take the Dorian as my collection of notes, then I'm going to have to back into it, which is one of the problems with telling people from a scale standpoint that you're playing in like C Dorian or something, right? Because then they have to back into and say, okay, what collection of notes actually is that? It would be nicer to say we're doing the collection of notes around the A sharp Ionian, focusing in on the D note, on the Dorian node, which would be a C. So right, because that will tell you the collection of notes and the one to focus in on. But any case, we're going to focus then on the same note, which is the C note, but now you can see that we have the cookie cutter that has been assigned to it of around the Dorian. Now note that the cookie cutter shape is basically the same full cookie cutter shape if you cut out the entire fretboard. We're just shifting the thing up, but we're measuring it around now the Dorian node. We're gonna describe the shape of the cookie cutter around this particular node of the cookie cutter, the Dorian, instead of the Ionian. So if I stay on the same point, then if we didn't move anywhere, then we're going to stay on the C and not go anywhere from the C. So that would be from a DD modal range. Let's go to the next one up and say now we're going to go up one. So we got one modal half step up, which would be the second scale degree. If we go one modal half step up from the Dorian, then we're going to land on the Phrygian. Why? Because the Dorian is the 2, and then we're going to go up to the 3. It'd be a 2-3 modal range, one modal half step up, which would be the second scale degree, which would be a note half step of 2. So we would call that once again a 2 note away major second, the same distance as we saw in the Ionian, even though we're in a minor mode this time. I'd rather call it a 2 note away from the Dorian node first modal half step. So if we make this, then we're going to say, okay, the Dorian, that C is now the Dorian, and we're going to be going up to the D. So now the D is the Phrygian. So notice you have the same distance. You could still say, hey, look, that's a 2-note away major second from the C to the D. The C to the D will always have a 2-note away distance, but it'd be better to call it now a DP modal range, because now the relationship within the context of whatever I'm playing is more important to see it as a DP modal range, a 2-3 modal range, rather than a going from the C note to the D note, because the C note is no longer the Ionian. In the context of the song, it's the Dorian, or whatever I'm doing, right? So that's going to be one modal half step up. It would be the first, one modal half step up. It would be the second scale degree if I make this the 1, and it would be 1, 2 notes up. Okay, so let's say if I go up to here, then what's that one? That's going to be, if I say this is going to be 5 notes between here, because there's a kink in the tuning or the fault line shifted up. So 5, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. 14 minus 12 is like 4 minus 2, which is 2. So if I go around in a circle, you can still see that that's going to be, in essence, the same distance. If I see the C is also back here, so that's 2 notes up from that C. So in other words, if I count this out, it'll be 5, 4, 3, 2. These 2 notes are, in essence, the same. All right, let's go to the next one down and say, all right, what if I go to the next one down, which would be the second modal half step up, or the third scale degree? I'm going to get to note number 7, which is going to be a D sharp. So why is that? Because we're going to say if I go from the Dorian, then I'm going to land on the Lydian mode. That's a 2-4 modal range. That's going to be then a 2 modal half steps up, third scale degree. It's going to have a note half steps of 3, which is a 3-note away minor third. I'd rather call it a 3-note away, this time from the Dorian node, second modal half step. So that's going to land us on a different note that wasn't in this collection of notes over here, because now we're measuring around the cookie cutter shape being shifted up to the Dorian, even though we're focusing around the same note.